Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
I'm Allison Kane, and welcome to In the Sauce, a podcast about building consumer brands from the ground up. I love doing this show because I get to interview everyone from production gurus to marketing and social media mavens, anyone who can guide me on this crazy journey. This is the story of building Haven's Kitchen sauces, but it's also the story of every growing brand because we're all in the sauce. Today, I'm talking with Jessica Bernheim, the head of marketing and strategy at Daring Foods. In this role, she's responsible for leading Daring's brand strategy, innovation, digital marketing, shopper marketing, and consumer market insights. Among other accomplishments, Jessica developed the 3-year strategic innovation pipeline for retail and food service and managed expansion into new product categories. Before joining Daring, Jess was head of new product development for North America at Upfield, the largest plant-based food company in the world. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
I'm happy to host you. We've known each other for a long time, and I've watched you blossom as a what I call like big kid marketer. And you're someone who I've wanted to ask some of these like very basic questions, but that I don't know the answers to, which I assume means that a lot of other people don't know the answers either. So I'm excited for this episode, and I know you're going to explain a lot.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So let's just go through your very lovely introduction and just break down some of what each thing means, because you know, I think a lot of people come into CPG without sort of any formal training. And we use words like brand pillars and brand strategy and innovation and insights. And, you know, they have meaning and we understand them generally, but there's more to it. And there's like structure to these things that I think a lot of us don't really know, but are really interested to learn. So a word like strategy can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but I'd love to just hear how you define brand strategy, what that means, how you approach it, whether it's like how you think about it or how you get a team to start, you know, making it. How often it changes, how you track to it, all of those things. So just give us the 101 on brand strategy.
Absolutely. So I think brand strategy at the highest level is really about how a brand communicates what makes its products different from the competitive set and what values the brand stands for to its target consumer. And then I think a good brand strategy is very specific about what those product differences are. They use storytelling to weave together a powerful creative that speaks to both those product differences and those brand values, and then is highly consistent across all media channels, as well as shopper marketing and packaging with a unified tone of voice. And then I think ultimately the most effective brand strategy is one that really creates a strong sense of loyalty between the consumer and the brand, And it does that by creating this connection between the values of the brand and the values of the consumer. So that when a consumer goes into a store and they pick up a product, the brand values are clear to them from packaging and from all the marketing they've consumed. And those values reflect either how they feel already about themselves, or even more importantly, in an aspirational way, how they want to feel about themselves. And I think ultimately the most effective brand strategies create that loyalty between the consumer and the products and the brand.
Okay, so I love that. And, last week I had Miles on from Zabs, and I was using words like, it feels like it's just clear, and it is cuts like a knife, or, I use these sort of like ambiguous expressions to sort of say what you're saying, which is that everything that the brand puts out, from its copy to its social media, to its shopper marketing, to the package, to the product, all feel crystal clear. And I think that's what you're saying, because sometimes you don't necessarily want to buy a brand or like a brand, but you know what it stands for, you know who it's for. It's not mistakable for something else. It's very clear whether it's for you or not. That's a different story. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, if you have a good understanding of what that brand stands for, what the values of the brand are, then it's been successful in creating and communicating its brand strategy. And then to your point, if it resonates with you and it reflects this vision you have of yourself, that's what really will create loyalty between you and the product. So, for example, if you think about the water category, which is selling a bunch of products that are largely very similar to each other, the reason that some people are going to pick up one water bottle over another, often, in many cases it has to do with price, but if we put price aside for a moment, there are some people who have a really strong attachment to Evian, and some people have a really strong attachment to Smart Water. And when you ask them why, maybe they'll talk a little bit about the taste, but ultimately it's because those two brands have done a really good job in creating this identity that speaks to that consumer.
Right. And I mean, taking a note from that, I feel like Evian, when you say Evian, it's because it has the minerals in it. I don't even know, it has minerals. That's the word that comes to mind. And that is probably because they have been telling me that for the last 30 years. And I don't even know exactly what it means, but it feels like something that's probably good for me.
Yeah, exactly. I think, they're the most powerful legacy brands out there. If you can immediately call to mind something, for Dove Women's, it's body positivity. There are other brands that have that very quick association. That is a brand that has really carried out its brand strategy very effectively.
So can you give me a couple of examples of more modern brands, new brands that are sort of new in the zeitgeist, not Liquid Death, because I don't want to talk about them, but anything where you just feel like they've done a really good job from A to Z with that strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, there are a lot of brands out there. I think one that immediately comes to mind is Jones Road, the clean beauty brand that Bobbi Brown started. I think she has just done such a phenomenal job, from the products that she's launched and being super minimalistic with how many products she launches, to the very clean packaging, sort of the neutral white background with the logo, to leading with her founder story in creating a brand that is all about clean beauty, natural beauty, ease of use, reasonable price point, in a way that, frankly, as someone who was not very interested in makeup before, has now bought a lot of the Jones Road's products.
Yeah. And it's really beautiful when, you said words like clean packaging, minimal, right? Not too many SKUs. That's also the kind of makeup that she's talking about.
Exactly.
So it's this thread that runs through. And so if I was okay, Jess, can you come and help us just tidy up the brand strategy? Where do you start? What's kind of the starting point for you thinking about it when you go to a new company or when you're thinking about a company? Like if you had your druthers?
Yes. What a fun question. It reminds me of my first few weeks at Daring, when I put together this Word document where I started writing out, what are the character traits that to me define the Daring brand, and what are the character traits that do not. And then I build on those traits. I sort of say, like, okay, maybe we are, and this is not relevant to Daring, but this is just an example, like maybe we're a tongue-in-cheek brand, but we always lead with kindness, and we have a little bit of sass, but we never hurt. We never want to hurt someone because we're young and we're hip and we're funny, but we're not. We're never mean. Obviously, you never want a brand to be mean. So you come up with these attributes as if you're just like you're describing a person, and then you translate that into a tone of voice. Then you translate that into an aesthetic statement about like the types of food photography you use, or the type of people and how they're dressed, and are they outside, are using natural light, things like that. You think about the mission, and usually the mission is well established for a company, and if it's not, it needs to be clearly articulated, and that's those brand values. So articulating that, and it all should stem together where you have this very cohesive sense of who the brand is. That's the identity. So it's the character traits that describe it, the tone of voice, the look and feel, that tie back to the mission. And then that helps you have a starting point from which to develop creative. And then from there, you have different messages that you use to communicate those points. And, if you're, very data focused, you might test those messages through consumer surveys or through A/B testing. But that's ultimately how I think about creating a brand strategy at the very beginning.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a really awkward question, but I feel like I can do this because we're old friends. But I don't usually ask people to like dissect Havens, but I'm curious what you would say about would you say that our mission and our values carries through our messaging and our content and our packaging? Like, would you say that if you didn't know me, you would know what the brand stands for?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm so honored you're asking this question. It's so fun. I think you've done something
It's so awkward for you if you don't.
I'm certainly not going to say anything negative. I'm no fool. But
no, but I could use a little bit of, this is my opportunity to get like a free, Jess brain for a couple minutes. So yeah, tell me. Yeah.
No, I genuinely think, for me, when I think about your story, starting a cooking school and your work at NYU and food science, I think you are clearly a lover of food. And to me, your whole story is around like making cooking easier and more accessible to people. And the whole idea to me behind sauces that everyone can make, or anyone can make a chicken breast, right? Or cook a piece of salmon. Like these are really, really basic things, but those don't taste very exciting. And, they're not products, they're not like foods that consumers want to eat every single day because they're kind of boring. And to me, the whole mission behind Haven's Kitchen is to make cooking more accessible and more exciting by giving people these easy sauces that they can use to sort of zhuzh up their food. And I feel like that comes through in the packaging, which is really innovative, like the squeeze pouch. And I think, you've done a really good job being like a founder forward brand where because I think, of your background and your cooking school, like there's real authenticity in this idea that you want cooking to be easier and more fun for everyone. So I do think it ties together really nicely. And, obviously I've known you for so long, but I do feel that I have a pretty strong sense, like quite immediately from the product, the packaging, and the marketing that you've done.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's nice to hear. And now the follow-up to that is, but what would you tidy up?
I think that you have done a lot of good work with the marketing that I've seen. It's very functional. It's like very beautiful, very food centric. I'd say like the next thing is like how you bring it to life in other types of creative, right? Like sometimes narrative-based creative can be interesting, and that's something I haven't seen, but I also just might not have seen it. But like if you are creating 30-second ads on Instagram, like there maybe is a story there that you want to tell, and building out that kind of narrative could be a compelling way to bring people in. And it could just be bringing your founder story to life through creative, because I think your founder story does speak to the mission of the brand in a really impactful way.
No, I think that's really helpful, and I don't want to put you on the spot. So I appreciate you kind of playing with me, because I really just always want to hear from, I mean, that's why I have this thing, because, it's fun to hear from people who know better, or know more and have different experiences, I guess is the more like, positive way to say it. But I think that's a really good point too. And, I think what you're picking up on is my reluctance to do that. So it's funny because I think my team for years has wanted me to be more forward. And I toy with it sometimes, but I never feel authentic doing it. I think what's been interesting for me, and this is just, me navel grazing for a second, is that LinkedIn, what is now my outlet for being my authentic self. Whereas otherwise I feel like I'm like, hi, I'm Allie and I'm da 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 da. And this is our sauce, like it feels kind of like pushy. Whereas LinkedIn doesn't, because it's just literally like, this is what I woke up thinking about, and what I think the people who think that my thoughts are worth reading will also find worth thinking about. And it has been interesting to see that it is I don't know, it's a channel of something. So that's been kind of fun, but I think you're right. And I'm going to go make an ad with myself.
I look forward to seeing it.
All right, we're going to take a little break and we're going to come right back.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
I'm back with Jessica Bernheim, and she just gave me a lot of good advice about brand strategy. And I guess, one of the things that I want to talk about just in following this up a little bit is that, it's hard to know sometimes if you are being true to, this is why I kind of wanted to ask, like, how often does it change? Right. So like, for example, we know that, we want bold flavor, better for you, convenient, right? Those are the things that we are trying to solve. Those are the things that we try to speak to, because those are the things that get in the way of our community or consumers enjoying cooking. But when it comes to the creative, for example, I noticed like in our latest creative, it's a little bit more bright and punchy and colorful. Our last photo shoot was a little bit more, maybe it was like pushing it a little bit more with more saturation. The one before that was a little more minimal. And while we think that it's just what we like, obviously we're being influenced by kind of the zeitgeist. And a lot of creative starts to look very similar. A lot of it starts to look kind of the same. So we want to hold true to who we are, but we also don't want to look, dusty at all. So how do you kind of reconcile that, kind of adhering to these values, making sure that your tone of voice and your aesthetic are aligned with sort of who you are, like as a brand, but also having, the flexibility and kind of going with the times a little bit so that you don't look outdated?
It's a great question. And I think it's important to note that obviously brand strategy does evolve over time, whether that's due to a change in culture or a change in category, or, you're changing priorities for a business. But ultimately, for a brand strategy to be really effective, it has to be consistent. And I think that is number one. Consistency over time breeds authenticity. But with that said, I think what you're asking about is more about evolving creative. And I think you can be really consistent with your brand values and with the mission while updating your creative to reflect changing tastes, and a more fresh look and feel. And it's really interesting when you think about legacy brands that have had to do this, and they've had to even evolve. They've had to evolve their creative, very carefully and very slowly, but a lot to be modern with sort of a new day. And that was something that I got to work on very closely when I was at Country Crock, because this was when I was at Upfield, like super powerful legacy brand, hundreds of years of history, in a category that was losing relevance. And we wanted to maintain what made Country Crock special, which was this like farm fresh aesthetic and the ties to the country and our Kansas roots. But we had to update it aesthetically, and update it with language that felt relevant and timely and modern. And we did that. I was working on the launch of Country Crock Plant Butter, so we did that through the launch of a sub brand where we really evolved the aesthetic look and feel to sort of play in the natural space, which is to say, we used a lot of blues and greens to evoke nature, but unlike the historic brown tub, we had all white packaging to give a cleaner look. But then, my manager at the time was managing the Country Crock core brand relaunch, and she did an incredible job making small changes to the logo, so that the font felt more modern, but still felt connected to the old sort of shape and feel of the logo, or to the background. I don't know if you've looked at, Country Crock packaging over the years, but you'll see that the new packaging, there's a light landscape, by which I mean like Country Crock Light might be sunrise and Country Crock core might be more sunset. And it's like evoking the natural country landscape, but in a way that felt a little bit more modern.
Yeah. So fun. It's so interesting because like I am such a brand person. Like I have, I don't know, my dad died a few years ago, and I have all of these like really intense memories around him eating a bowl of Raisin Bran with like blueberries in it. And, I was missing him a couple weeks ago, and I went to the bodega. I haven't bought Kellogg's Raisin Bran in a really long time, but these things they hit these nerves in us, and they remind us of things. And I'm sure Kellogg's has updated their Raisin Bran. I'm sure they've tidied their logo, but that purple box, like if they all of a sudden made that box orange, I wouldn't know what to do with myself, or if like Snap, Crackle, and Pop all of a sudden had, Cousin Joey, I think I'd be like very thrown off. So it is interesting how these things, and I guess, I'm such a 70s kid too. So there's like so much nostalgia and TV and, I don't know, maybe I'm also just thinking about the Pop-Tarts movie a little bit. But, trying to build it and I think a lot of times brands, like they know what they stand for. Like if you went around the room and asked, a lot of companies that I know, what are words that describe what you are, what your values are, what the team is, what you stand for. I think a lot of companies would have a lot of consensus around those words. It's then taking those words and kind of easing them into physical attributes and, messaging and tone of voice and font and which partnerships you do and how you show up in the world, and not hitting people over the head with it, but also just being really consistent. So it's hard.
And that's the fun part. It's really hard, but it's fun. And I would just say, like, I think what we're talking about is brand strategy. And then what we've been also alluding to is a creative campaign. And the creative campaigns, have to be new and fresh, but they all have to be consistent with the brand strategy.
And is there do you have like a one sheeter at every company that you work at that's like, here's our brand strategy? Like, what is the piece of paper that everyone goes back to, or the PowerPoint, or what are the things on the whiteboard that are just always there?
You mean in terms of the brand strategy for each specific brand?
Yeah, just in terms of I would like to have a very clear brand strategy that everyone can just always reference. Like whether they're making a deck or they're talking to a partner or we're just hanging out in the office and it's like on the wall. Like, it's almost like,
yeah.
Is that just sort of like the pillars of what you care about? Is that your mission statement as a brand? Is it like, what would it be like if it had to be tangible?
I think if it had to be tangible, it's your mission. It's your product differences. So your promise to the consumer around certain claims or ingredient requirements that are really critical and central to the brand you've launched. It's the attributes that describe your brand, that make up that brand identity. A sentence or two that captures the tone of voice and use the attributes to sort of build on that. And then usually there's like a few key colors that represent the brand's look and feel, a few images that speak to the type of food photography or the type of lighting or the aesthetic sort of center of the brand. It's like a page of these different bullet points that everyone can reference. And when you are launching different pieces of creative, you reference back, does this speak to the mission? Does it clearly
speak to the promise? Yeah,
exactly. Like, does it speak to the product differences? Does it speak, in the right tone of voice? And that's kind of like the one pager you have.
I love that. I'm actually, I think we should just make that, because we have a brand pillar slide, but we don't have this. And I would really love this. I think it's kind of, the shorthand version of a brand book.
Exactly.
Which a lot of companies don't have the time or the resources to make. But I want to go into the next thing in your lengthy, beautiful introduction, because it speaks to this. Because innovation, right? The next product line, the next flavor of a current product line, those all have to align with what you just said, with your mission, with your promise to the consumer, with the attributes, with the difference, So, we're coming out with a couple of new flavors of aioli. And I'll just tell you really, because everyone knows everything who listens to this, it is tempting to do a roasted garlic, because Kraft has a roasted garlic and Primal has a roasted garlic, and everyone knows what roasted garlic is, and it's straightforward. And we could just be sort of like the better for you, easy squeezy version of something that everyone knows, but it doesn't entirely align with a little bit more of a promise that we have, which is that we're going to somehow have something that brings like a little bit of an added, more restaurant quality, some say global, whatever, bold flavor. you can have a very flavorful roasted garlic, but so ours just feels like we kind of need to lean into that part of our brand promise, if that makes sense, as opposed to just making a better for you version of something that a lot of brands have. And we grapple with this a lot internally, because I think our job would be a lot easier if we could just be like, it's like Justin's, it's like Annie's, it's the same sriracha thing. Ours is just better for you in a squeeze pouch. But that's not what we've chosen to do. So all of this is my very long-winded way of getting to innovation. Because I know that that's a lot of what you focus on. How do you, again, mapping to this sort of one-pager that you've just made, how do you think about innovation where you have what I guess people call like the right to play? And also, how would you sort of, if you were in my position, we have kind of multiple pieces to our brand promise and to our differentiation. So I guess, how would you start sorting out a problem like that?
Great question. I think I just also wanted to respond to what you were saying, which is, it would be easy to do the better for you roasted garlic, but you're not, because your brand identity is more culinary. It's like pushing yourself and being more challenging. And it's so interesting because I come from, I grew up in a more traditional environment. I was working at Upfield, so we had these big legacy brands. And when you're at a company that has so much history, you're launching new products and you're serving, a mass audience and mass retailer channels, you want to be careful that you don't change too much all at once. And then being at a startup that is, very innovative, you really want to push the boundary. But with plant-based meat, you're also changing one thing, and you don't want to go crazy in how many things you change, because you're already asking the consumer to go from animal to plant-based. But I think you have captured the thing that makes Haven's Kitchen different, which is that you go a little further. You go into a culinary space. And I think that's such a perfect example of holding true to your brand strategy in innovation. So I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Well, I appreciate it. I think it is one of those things where a lot of founders I know have this, where because we started this from outside of the industry, let's say, we didn't do rule number one of starting a CPG company, which is just like take something existing and change one thing about it to bring an improvement, whether it's like make it organic, make it keto, make it, a better package, whatever that is. It's like that sort of one attribute thing. So I can totally understand in the context of a plant-based meat, you're going to have your drumsticks, you're going to have your nuggets, you're going to have your patties. You're not going to all of a sudden say, this is the new chicken truffle, which is a ball of chicken. Like you're not going to try to then add on a layer of innovation to where you're already being innovative. But somehow or another, we've kind of done that. Like we're like, it's in a pouch and it's this and it's that. And you've never heard of, yuzu. So here you go.
You have to, because you're in a crowded category. So it's how you're distinguishing yourself. And I think you've done a really good job there. With respect to your original question about innovation, I've spent a lot of my career so far in this space. And it's always really funny when you're at a party and someone says, what do you do? And you say, oh, I work in innovation. And they're like, that's like a buzzwordy job. It doesn't really, I didn't know that was a function.
It's like strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like saying you work in strategy. And so when I say I do strategy and I do innovation, it's just like, that's a fake thing.
All right.
But innovation, the way I think about innovation is a function that drives growth. And there are three types of innovation. There's product line extensions. So that is when you are adding new flavors or adding new functional ingredients to an existing lineup. So that's what you're doing with your new aiolis. There's renovations, which is where you are updating existing products. Maybe you found a better ingredient, or maybe you figured out a way to improve the nutrition label, but you are taking an existing product and you are improving it. And then there's new product launches within new categories. And that is really fun. And I think, there's a whole strategic framework that I put together when I was at Upfield and then when I was at Daring, where I use this framework to launch into new categories. And what I'll say is, you start with your core product line and you think, okay, this is what we make now. What is a list of categories where our brand has the credibility to extend into? And so an example would be like a yogurt brand has the credibility to extend into ice cream because they're both dairy. The consumer probably thinks they're made in a similar way. They are both consumables. They're similar, but a yogurt company does not have the credibility to extend into soap because one has nothing to do with the other. So you make this list of product categories, frankly, using your common sense. And of course, you're going to the grocery store and you're understanding all the different categories and you think about what your buyer covers. But really, it's like, what are the categories that make sense for our brand to launch into? And then once you have that short list, then you start looking at, the market size of each of these categories, the growth rate, the competitive saturation, and you're doing all of this more analytical work in order to determine if there's a white space opportunity. So is there some sort of unmet need in these categories that we can come into with a new product? And if you think there is, that's where you start to measure that white space need against an internal view. So does this new product category halo back positively on your core products? So is it in the same section of the store? Will it inspire consumers to buy more of your original product? Does it give you more expertise in that sort of larger space? Leverage existing marketing to build a stronger brand? And then also, of course, what are your company's internal capabilities? So, do you have the R&D expertise to develop in this new product category? Do you have the manufacturing capabilities? What does your supply chain look like, your logistics? So there's a lot of collaboration with all functions within a company. So whether that's, R&D, supply chain, finance, sales, you have to leverage all these different teams to put together a perspective. And it's almost like a funnel approach that is quantitative and strategic to come up with a recommendation for a new category launch.
I mean, that was like a master class right there. I started taking notes because Liam was like, don't type on your computer because everyone can hear it. So sorry, everyone, for like the last couple of episodes, if you've been hearing me taking notes while I'm asking questions. But I'm taking them on a piece of paper next to me, and I've now written all over it. And then I just stopped writing and started listening, and I can just listen back. But that it's just basically that was great because, and again, that is kind of what we did with Aioli. Like we sat down, sales weighed in, marketing weighed in, ops weighed in. We took like, what is the most challenging part of our current fresh line? What are the challenges? Okay. Challenge coming from sales is they don't know where to put it. So let's pick something where it's very freaking obvious where it goes. Like it has a set, it has a category. What's the hardest thing from ops? We have too many unique ingredients. Our supply chain is, very complicated and unique. Okay. We're going to try to simplify it. And marketing is, we have a challenge sometimes messaging chimichurri and ginger miso at the same time because people use them differently, as it turns out. And, all of that and why fresh and all that. So we kind of reverse engineered it a little bit. Like we took the challenges and then of course it was, what do we want to keep? Going back to that one pager, we're not going into bars or granola or hydration mixes. That doesn't have anything to do with bringing joy to people who want to make dinner. But this is really cool. And then do you end up with sort of like, here are 3 or 4 things and sort of a leadership chooses, or do you say, okay, here's the plan for the next 3 years, says me, Like what happens after? Oh, and then I guess my other question is, I know that you're an insights person too. So when does the community consumer weigh in on this process? Like after, is there an unmet need? Can we figure out the right capabilities to make this thing or these ideas? How do you bring insights into that conversation?
I think that you bring insights into that conversation sort of at the like later stage, because the upfront work tends to be both analytical and strategic, where you're really assessing the market and you're looking at competitors. You're doing a lot of tasting. So that's an area where you're bringing in the full team. You're tasting all the products that are in the competitive set, and you're kind of identifying, these taste good because of X, these taste bad because of Y, but these don't have the right protein or fat or carbs or whatever. But sort of towards the end of the process, where you want to get consumer feedback on that white space opportunity, there you can do a few things. You can code surveys and launch them to your category buyers to ask people who are in the category, who buy products already, do they feel that there is X thing missing? You phrase the question in different ways. You can do aided or unaided questions. You can ask them, would they be likely to purchase this product instead of or in addition to products they're already purchasing? You can get a lot of really valuable insights from a consumer survey that are very helpful, both in terms of giving you information about, an unmet need, but also then when you've decided on what product you want to develop, that information is very valuable to take to the retailer.
Have you ever gotten a consumer survey as a consumer and been like, they forgot to ask this, like they missed this question? Like, has that ever happened to you? Because you do consumer surveys.
That's such a funny question. I honestly don't think I fill out that many consumer surveys as a consumer. So I've never.
It's funny though, because, we're like, we did this thing with a really cool vegan magazine called Veg News. And it was in conjunction with launching the aioli. And we had, a lot of Amazon orders just kind of generated from this thing. And, we're feeling good about ourselves because like they're in our email flow and we have them sort of segmented. And now we're like, okay, and we can like ask them all these questions. And we're all sort of like, what do we want to ask them? Like, I mean, it's like, we know that we have this really great group of people that have just bought the product that, followed through with their whole path to purchase, that, of course we're going to say like, thank you and yay, and here's some recipes and do our whole thing that we normally do. But this is a group of people that could actually give us like some real insight. And I'm not that clear on what we want to know, I mean, so I'm just, sometimes it's like challenging, even when you have this resource, it's like, I think a lot of people are like me where, we kind of have an idea of what we want to understand from them, but we don't entirely know. I mean, I guess one of the big questions is, did you buy this in addition to something or as a substitute for something? Obviously for us, we want to know, what did you use it on? What'd you think? Have you finished it? But is there anything that like you think brands miss that they should always ask?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I was honestly going to respond to the question around brainstorming, like how do you think about the types of questions you want to ask? And it's funny because I'm working on coding a survey right now. And sometimes it's hard because you feel like when you're just having a conversation with your colleagues, you're like, oh, that would be a really interesting thing to ask consumers. But then when you're facing a blank document, you draw a blank yourself.
Yes.
And
right.
I honestly think that it's easiest to sort of start from like the basic questions, which is like, and a lot of these basic questions you won't include, but it's like, it's almost like a logical flow. Like, do you like this product? Would you buy it again? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? As you said, did you finish the product? did you use it in combination with other seasonings? Did you use it on cooked meat? Did you use it to marinate? Like, did you like this better than other products? Why or why not? And you just like go down, you start asking all these questions. And then the interesting ones that will be kind of a little bit more leverageable will emerge from almost that like conversation with yourself.
Right. No, that's a really good way to think about it. Yeah. Just go back to brass tacks. And it's funny because we have this a lot. Like anytime we've done a social nature survey or anytime we're just like, hey folks, checking in, what do you think of this? Like we kind of know over here in like the side of our head, like what we want to think or what we want to ask. But you're right. It's like you do draw a blank. And then I think the answer is a really good one that you had, which is just go back to, did you like it? Did you use it? Would you buy it again? That's probably a good start. And then you'll start asking other things. I love that. And then the daring line that you launched, like, so just putting, it into like a real life scenario. So you launched frozen meals for daring. Where can you, without giving away any like, company secrets, like how did the road get you to that very, very sort of basically? And, from idea to execution, what were there any surprises along the way as you were going down the road, I guess?
Great question. I think at a high level, I very much use that framework that I shared, that funnel approach to get to frozen entrees. I came in with a big deck and a strong recommendation and use that to map out this pipeline of innovation, from 2024 to 2027, that includes our frozen entrees and then other SKUs that, we want to launch from this approach. But very specifically, frozen entrees is a $9 billion category, but with a lifestyle segment, and lifestyle is sort of that better for you segment that's closer to $1.5 billion. So much, much smaller, much less well developed. And there are very few brands, even within that lifestyle space, that are actually clean label, that are also high protein, that have some sort of, clean label plant-based meat. And so we felt there was this white space because there was this gap that we felt we could uniquely fill. But another really interesting insight for us that I think also really complemented the strategic flow is that when we think about Daring, which is a plant-based chicken, and Daring is, an amazing product. It's whole muscle, it's unbreaded, it's high protein, it's pre-seasoned. But like animal chicken, a lot of consumers are nervous about cooking it and messing it up. And we found actually that to be a challenge with adoption. And so to address that, we updated our cooking instructions and we've created content around cooking it, because the reality is cooking Daring is actually quite easy and you just have to cook with a little bit of confidence. You fry it or you bake it or what have you. It's pretty simple, but we recognize that consumers have a little bit of a need for some added tools. And the frozen entree to us was the perfect vehicle for consumers to try our product without any of the guesswork around cooking, because it comes in a bowl that you can just stick in the microwave. And now you have a way to try the product and you don't have to be nervous about messing it up.
That's such a great, that's like a great, story or like, embodiment of the concept, I guess. And what were the insights? Like you went out and said, like, did you like it? Did you buy it? Why not? And a lot of what came back with why not was, I'm scared to cook it. Or was it more anecdotal and you just started seeing like people on Instagram or TikTok being like, how do I cook it? Like what, or was it a combination of everything and you just were like, oh, this is interesting?
We've definitely gotten consumer feedback that they're nervous to cook the product. I think that this is something that is true for all plant-based meat, is that because especially it's a new product category. And so I think consumers, they don't know when it's done, because it's not like you cut it open and
Right.
the
The
juices are
same.
flowing and there's blood because
Right.
it's plant-based. So we definitely have just gotten that feedback from consumers, through social, or anecdotally. But what I will say is that we did launch this big consumer survey when we were trying to identify, the white space opportunities in frozen entrees. And we were asking consumers who buy frozen entrees, who are open to buying plant-based, who have bought plant-based products but aren't necessarily strict plant-based eaters, what are the gaps they see in the frozen entree space? And we had, a list of 10 choices. And one of the main ones that came back was clean label products. And for us, this was another perfect opportunity for Daring to enter the space, because Daring, one of its core brand attributes is that it has this very short, simple list of ingredients. And unlike our competitors, which have 50 plus ingredients, many of which you don't understand or want to put in your body, Daring's whole identity is that it's 6 simple ingredients in our original product. You can understand all of them. You'll feel good about purchasing the product. You'll feel good about eating every one of those ingredients. And so we can make a frozen entree that's very clean label using a very clean label plant-based meat. And that insight came from the consumer survey that we ran.
Yeah, that's so cool. And it all leads back to that promise to the consumer, because, you just connected all of your own dots. That's really fun. That's very cool. And speaking of the plant-based world, what do you think's happening in the plant-based world? I mean, I know it's a big question. I think a lot of, I was listening to Scott Galloway talking about Tesla, and he was saying that, Tesla's gotten kind of, the for lack of a better word, shit kicked out of it lately. And partly that's like a response to Elon, but partly that's because Tesla was not valued as a car company should have been valued. And now it's starting to come down to be valued the way a car company is valued. It's not an AI company. It's not a robotics company. It's a car company. And, considering that, it's still arguably overvalued. And I was thinking about that in conjunction sort of with like the plant-based stuff, where there was a minute where everything was sort of being valued like tech companies, and they were positioning themselves that way, but they're food companies. And there's sort of a band of the way that food companies are valued. And, it seems like it isn't going away. The category seems to be doing quite well from what I understand. It's just maybe the hype and the hoopla and the this isn't food, this is amazing science that is like beyond your ability to understand it, normal person. Maybe that's kind of going away, and we're settling into just some really good products that happen not to have any meat. So that's kind of my little take on it. I'm curious, as someone who's worked in the industry for a long time, like, what's yours?
I think the plant-based food space is here to stay, and it's because people eat so much meat, and that level of meat consumption has a really dangerous impact on the environment. And unfortunately, the environment's not getting better. And luckily for us, the younger generation feels even more and more empowered to do something about it and change their own behavior. And one of the ways that's occurring is through eating more plant-based products. So I definitely believe in the long-term importance of the plant-based food movement, but that certainly doesn't discount the fact that we're going through a little bit of a slowdown. And the way we've been thinking about it at Daring is through something called the Gartner Hype Cycle, which is almost like a geographical representation to describe the adoption of new technology or new trends. And basically what it shows is at the beginning of a new technology or a new trend, there's a lot of hype and there's a huge spike in excitement and growth. And, in this case, a lot of venture money flows in and a lot of consumers get excited and people write tons of articles. And then there are a lot of inflated expectations. And then there's what we call the trough of disillusionment, which is a lot of people are are disappointed by the level of hype that was discussed during that sort of that initial stage. And then the next thing is the slope of enlightenment, and then it's called the plateau of productivity. And it basically means that, there's a lot of excitement at the beginning, then, reality sets in, and you have this first generation of products that maybe didn't meet consumers' expectations, and some of them get a little disappointed. And that triggers that next generation of products, which are, in our case, clean label, high protein, easy to use, and that triggers more growth. And I think right now what we're seeing is there's such a long tail of plant-based products in the space, and retailers are starting to cut that long tail. And what's going to emerge is there are going to be a number of winners that are part of this next generation of products that actually meet consumers' expectations around taste and texture, but also ingredients. And I think we're in that like slower moment, but the next generation of products, of which Daring is one, are going to emerge as real long-term players in plant-based food.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I'm just picturing, I think everyone who listens to this podcast has heard me like whine about our Wegmans placement, not in every set, but often we're in the plant-based cheese refrigerator, and we're basically on the bottom shelf under like 10 shelves of just 7 different brands of plant-based cheese, and everyone has like a Monterey Jack shredded. They have a, cheddar slice. They have a creamy, whatever. And they just, it's like this real sea of sameness to me. And I feel like there was a minute where at one point we were in a set with all the plant-based cheese, and then the retailer decided to discontinue everything that wasn't plant-based cheese and just made this ridiculously large set of plant-based cheese. That did not go great. So they called us back a few years later, which was nice. But, it seems like this is where maybe it's painful and it's not fun, but this is what we've all been talking about, which is like, this is where you've really got to make sure your product is really freaking good. The messaging is really clear. You are, if like I keep, you keep referring to the brand promise, like you are adhering to that promise, and, the integrity and the quality are really there, because consumers now aren't willing to spend on something that isn't. And everyone's just gotten better at it over the last couple of years. So there's a culling, I guess, which feels very painful and does get a lot of attention, but probably ends up being better for the consumer at the end of the day.
Definitely. I think it really represents the consumer demanding excellence from food companies, and that's how it should be. I mean, we're the people who are buying and eating these products, and what we consume is important to our health. So I'm excited about, the next generation of products that, really respond to consumer requirements around taste and ingredients. And that's why I'm excited also about what Daring is doing in the space.
Yeah. I mean, it's my favorite. I've told you that for a while. I mean, yeah, even before you went there. I'm going to ask you this question because I feel like I should. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about or that you wanted to make sure that you got across to listeners that I haven't asked, like that you really want to say?
I think that this is just, I mean, I don't know if you need to include this in the episode, but this is a really fun job. Launching new food products and working in innovation is a lot of fun. And there's so much joy in seeing a product that you conceived of on a shelf. I mean, the first products that I launched, when I walk into the grocery store and I see them, I'm like stroking them. I mean, not literally, because that would be inappropriate, but like they're like my babies. And it's so cool to see products that you launched in a grocery store.
Yeah, no, I'm fully including that in the episode because honestly, I think that's why most of us stay in this. You know, the pain of it is, you know, to quote my dad, like the pain of losing is much more intense than the joy of winning. So and you do it more frequently, but, you know, there is nothing like making something that people love and seeing it, you know, blossom and seeing people take it and make it their own and do things with it and think of it as their thing. You know, this is in my sauce in my cart every week. You know, we make this, you know, salmon every week with your, you know, ginger miso. Like that's huge. That's the most joy. So we're keeping it. And Jess, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this. I feel like you just gave us a little bit of a masterclass in strategy and consistency and innovation. And I'm definitely I can't wait to get to the office and get on the whiteboard with my mission and my promise and all that. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Liam, thank you as always. I did not type, so hopefully it sounds a little better. And thank you for getting this up on the air or whatever the expression is quickly, because I know we're recording a little later than usual. And everyone who's listening, thank you. And I've gotten a bunch of DMs just this past week from a bunch of people, so I don't know, but thank you. They really do make me feel good. And I'll be back next week with another episode of In the Sauce. In the Sauce is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Latham.
And I'm Leah Bottima.
And we're the hosts of Were You Raised by Wolves?
Each week we try to make the world a kinder, nicer place.
Well, that's the idea, at least.
I mean, we try.
Have you ever wondered what to do if you're ghosted?
Or what to do when a friend asks you to borrow money?
Or the proper way to eat Cheetos?
You know, the big questions.
So please find Were You Raised by Wolves wherever you listen.